What is going on, everyone? Welcome on in to Open Ice Hits, episode 2. By the way, I don't think it's ironic that after we spoke to Johnny Gaudreau on episode 1, he ends up scoring the overtime game winner against Vancouver. And I like to think, considering they play Edmonton right before episode 3, maybe some of that good juju, those good vibes sneak into the game prior to episode 3.
Well, I mean, that game winner was meant to be, right, Brodes?
That's what I'm thinking.
He talked to us, and then he goes out and scores a game winner. I mean, that's just meant to be. And we'll have to see how that goes, though, because, I know we're going to lead off talking about that game, that Monday night, his success, and the fact that they found a way to win that game very quickly after they had it tied up against them, and they come right back out on a power play and they win the game in overtime. I think we're going to gloss over the next one after that, though, because that was games get ugly in a hurry sometimes, and that's just the way it goes. It was, I think, their third game in a row against Vancouver, too, so I'm sure they're tired of seeing them anyway. So we get two really good ones before we come back on, two more against Edmonton, the Battle of Alberta. It'll be great to lead into that with him.
I'm not going to lie to you. That second game against Vancouver, it might have been, was that the third game against Vancouver? Regardless, there's so many damn games that keep playing one another. The ugly game on Wednesday, it was so unwatchable to me that I had to go over to the Edmonton game. I actually went for you know what? Even though I have the 3 TV setup, sometimes games get so ugly, I go, whoop. You're out of here. I'm not even keeping the ugly-ass game on, and I went over to Edmonton, even though McDavid already recorded his 500th point. That was way more entertaining of a game. And the fact that, and this is almost credit to Sidney Crosby, the pace that McDavid is scoring right now just seems so outrageous. So when you hear that he did it in the same exact amount of games as Crosby, it's like, damn, you almost forget how lethal Crosby was back in his prime.
Yeah, I know. Look, it's unfortunate that game was the way that it was, because it was a pretty small slate of games on Wednesday night, and you had a bunch of good ones to lead into it. I mean, one of the things we're going to talk about on this show today is the Central Division, that Carolina-Florida game, which, by the way, 5:00 start. What a time to get started on your day with this. That was outstanding, that game, and it was shaping up to be that way too. I feel like I walked away during that game for 2 minutes. I came back, and all of a sudden it went from being 2-0 to 4-1 that quickly. And I found out, I think I saw the Calgary goal. I walked away for a second. I came back, and all of a sudden they scored 2 more. What's going on here? I had to go back
right.
Quickly,
that's right.
Quickly
they scored
see where it all went downhill that quickly, because they came right back with 1, and then they scored again right after. It's like, forgetting to play for 2 minutes or something like that, and all of a sudden the game's over because of that. We've watched that a number of times in different situations.
Yeah, I was going to say, as soon as Calgary scored, I got a little excited. All right, here we go, because naturally I'm going to root for them. I want my friend to succeed out there. And then within 2 seconds, it's like, what are you doing? You're falling asleep. It's almost like me in my prime when I'm out there on the ice. I'm like, damn, I'm dash 2 that quickly? All right, my ass is on the bench for the next couple games.
But it was so clear too when you go back and you look at the finals that one of these is not like the rest of them. You had a bunch of these 1 goal or close games right down the stretch, and then there's that one. It just sticks out like a sore thumb,
No doubt.
It's never, I'd love to sit there and say that's one that keeps you entertained a little bit for longer, but as soon as maybe 5 minutes into the third period, it's still 4-1. You're like, all right.
I even went a little Australian Open over that. And that's saying a lot here. Look, yeah. I mean, I'm admitting it, but I'm also a tennis fan. I'm not going to lie. But I would never, look, that's a big statement that I'm going Australian Open when you got some good Canadian division hockey going on. So, look, you mentioned the Central Division. I'll toss this one up to you because you looked at the Central Division last night and was like, Broach, we got to talk about it. I'm like, yeah, you're damn right we do. But there's also that Penguins discussion on the table. Which one do you want to hit on first?
I think we need to get into the Penguins thing first.
Okay.
Because that is starting to get to a point where, that news was out for a little while, and we had so much, with Johnny on and talking about a bunch of stuff with the North Division that we didn't really get to it last time. I think we should get to it, but definitely, keeping that Central thing going for a tease for a little later on in this episode, I'm not going to lie. I think I remember hearing a comment from Tampa Bay coach John Cooper about how it's a more competitive division than everybody thinks it is. And there's a lot of good teams there. And I probably kind of brushed it off a little bit because I don't see Florida in that vein. And I know Carolina's got talent. I wasn't sure if Dallas was going to be one of those teams that had a lot of playoff success that couldn't put it all together in a shortened season. Columbus had changes that were made. Who knows if it's really going to be that. I mean, I think I kind of thought it was going to be Tampa Bay, maybe Carolina, maybe Dallas, and the rest was going to be fighting for the fourth spot. And it wasn't even going to be all that competitive of a fourth spot. Wait until we talk about these teams and how competitive and close this division is. It's going to be great. But let's hit the Pittsburgh discussion because that's really the one that's juicy at this point, because how can you not look at their situation right now? And obviously, the news about the GM opening was out there for a while. It was known that Jim Rutherford had left, and it was this conversation that was going to go on and trying to fill that spot as best they could. I don't know about you, Brodes. As soon as I heard Ron Hextall's name come up, I knew there's smoke here. So, where there's smoke, that's the way I felt anyway. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the report that came out when he had a second interview might as well have been the report that he was hired, because as soon as that happened, I'm like, that's where he's going. It's over. This whole thing's over.
I agree with you with the second interview side of things. When I originally saw that he was in the discussions and whatnot for the first time, I just figured they were doing their due diligence and, just trying to figure it out and see what his vibe was like. Because you got to remember, when you look at the Flyers roster, it's all his fingerprints, which is huge. And there's no doubt that he was very big in turning this franchise around. But there was also an ugly stain as well, where he's micromanaging. He's telling the team they can't eat certain things and chicken wings and this and that. And knowing how the Penguins operate, they're a high-class organization that, has success, whether it takes them a little bit to get there. They had to go through some ugly times before the Crosby and Malkin era kind of rejuvenated, but with Lemieux, and they always have success. They're one of those franchises that have solid runs. I don't know if that would have stopped them. I thought maybe before he was hired that might have stopped him, because, well, what the hell is that? Who would want that? But you look at the track record of how the Flyers are doing right now, and that would intrigue you enough to at least have the conversation. So, of course, I see both sides. But what I find the most fascinating is, are they committed to a rebuild? Because Hextall's track record here is, look, it wasn't as if it's win-now mode. And with the Penguins, they have Sidney Crosby and Malkin. Those are win-now mode type of players. So what does this mean for the direction of the franchise?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And it's not a shock that it's a topic of conversation, even in the other side of the media that I'm on too. We're covering the Flyers on a regular basis. He's a former Flyer GM. He gets a new job. I think we're going to talk about it. I'm not surprised he got a job. And I'm kind of, one of the comparisons that I made when talking about it is to Craig Berube, a former Flyer coach, who, when he got the second job and had a second go around, was better equipped to do the job and had an idea of what he needed to do. That's kind of what I wonder for Hextall in this case, because, I don't look at the success of the LA Kings, and, I know that was kind of like, it's funny to say it now in hindsight, like when he got hired by the Flyers, that was what everybody talked about. Well, he helped build the Kings too. So he helped build the Kings. Wait until you see what he can do to build the Flyers. But I don't think that that's, like now I think everybody looks and goes, well, he wasn't the real guy behind building that championship team and getting them to that spot in that moment. He kind of had his hands on the draft aspect of it and the build from within. And that's what he did really well in Philly. Like, I almost wonder if the second go around for him is going to be, you've got to remember to put the emphasis on building around the current group as much as you do the future. And they don't really have much. I think I went back and I looked at their recent draft picks. They haven't had a first round pick in I don't know how long. Sometimes there's two of the last four drafts. I think they had
four
picks.
Rutherford's philosophy was, I don't give a damn about first round picks. I give a damn about Stanley Cups. And it's hard to argue with them considering they've had some great runs there. But that was a big mentality of him is, you can talk about first round picks all you want. I want to talk about the rings on my finger.
Well, and how can you not when you have Crosby and Malkin and Letang and, pick whichever goalie you want to go off of through those years. I mean, when they were winning Stanley Cups a couple of years back, it's Fleury and Matt Murray. Do you think you're going to try to go for it when you got two really good goalies, three really good players that you can build around? Jake Gensel was just emerging at that point in time. I think the one was during his rookie year, possibly. And so it's like he's just, there's another guy who you think is part of the core and could be a really good piece to your future for years to come. So you're going to go for it around those guys. And I mean, think about how, Crosby 4 years younger when they were winning the first or the second one in a row, he's still in the prime of his career. So why not go for it? But now you're in a really weird spot because you're still competitive in this division. You're still going to be in the hunt, so to speak. But you're not quite to me, I think the signs are there. When you lost in the qualifier in the playoff last summer, that's kind of the signs are there. You're starting to make that transition to being the team that's in between that straddles that line between playoff contender and anything can happen when you get into the playoffs.
But yeah, I agree with you. That was that turning moment. But I just wonder, when you have Malkin and Crosby and you still have those guys, is it time to commit to that, hey, we're no longer that playoff team? Or do you try and squeeze the lemon until you just maybe get that last drip of juice, which could be that run? The problem, too, though, is goaltending. And it's hard to – I can't be mad at what they did. Not that I would be mad emotionally as a fan, but just looking at it more objectively. With what they did with Marc-Andre Fleury, Matt Murray, it's unfortunate that it played out the way that it did. But at the time, in the moment, to rock with Matt Murray, look at what he did right then when they were winning the cup. Matt Murray was a stud, and obviously it hasn't worked out to that point, and now they're working with, DeSmith and Jari. I mean, the dumpster fire in the net is crazy, and it all started with the Fleury-Murray decision. But at the time, how can you disagree with what they did?
Yeah, it's tough to, and that's the weird part right now is you've got, look, we can talk about McDavid getting to 500 points and all that type of stuff and things like that. Crosby to me was always throughout the course of this thing, the best player in the world. And if you've got a guy who you can still classify as the best player in the world, or it's still up for discussion anyway, because there's people who are going to say it's like the Gretzky Lemieux conversation, which is ironic because it's the same two teams we're talking here. You're going to have guys who say Gretzky's the best that ever played, or there's people who are going to sit there and say, you know what? No, I think Mario was better, and that's a discussion. I side with the Gretzky side of that. And there's people right now though, who say McDavid's better. And then there's people who go, nope, it's Crosby. Crosby's still the best player in the world. No matter which side of the line you're on, you've got a top 3 player in the league, no matter how you want to spin it. And you're still I think you are still trying to squeeze a little bit out of it. I think of, when the whole pause happened and you're really struggling like I was to get content out because there's no games and things like that. I went back and I looked at old Flyers playoff series, and when they played the Rangers in 97, which was a conference final, so it doesn't mean the Rangers were bad by any stretch, but they're playing with Gretzky and Messier and guys like that who are in the final maybe 4 years of their career or close to. They're in their late 30s at that point. That is squeezing the last little bit out of it and going, well, you won 3 years ago, so maybe we can get one more run out of you.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And you go, I don't, and obviously it doesn't sometimes get there because there's a team out there that'll have the younger talent somewhere. It'd be really interesting to see Pittsburgh if they were there and made the playoffs and got to, it's a little weird structure this year, but let's say they got to play a team like Boston in the final, in the final round of the division, that divisional play before you get to the final 4 that's left, one from each division. And then maybe after that, if they did get through, well, they're playing Toronto or playing Edmonton or something like that, where they're playing one of those teams with one of these next guys who's going to take over the league. And if they are, that might be the spot where it's like the passing of the torch for Crosby. And you go, no, it's McDavid's turn. It's Matthews' turn. It's somebody like that. So
right.
That's what you're toying with right now is you need a future to build off of. And no doubt they've put together. Half of that team is still constructed from within, no matter how you want to look at it. But they need to do that again because they don't have even the picks that they've made, they've traded away to be successful in the here and now.
Well,
so
how much? Yeah,
that's not a Ron Hextall thing, So that's the difference.
No, for sure, and that's like a perfect segue for. I was going to bring up Brian Burke and what is his role going to be in this? And I'll be honest, I enjoy listening to him on Hockey Night in Canada, and he does some sports radio stuff as well for Hockey Central. I am truly going to miss hearing Burke speak. I think He's very entertaining for as monotone, or because he doesn't have like a lot of juice. He just tells it to you how it is. But I really enjoyed that. I'm going to miss him from that aspect as a fan, just listening to him talk hockey. But what is his role going to be? The way that I kind of look at it is, the Phillies hired a Dave Dombrowski, and for anyone who doesn't know who that is, it's like he's a big president of baseball operations who makes the final decisions and oversees the GMs, and he's been in multiple situations where he has gotten teams to the World Series and he has championships under his belt, and he's the president of baseball operations who oversees everything. I'm just curious with this Burke Hextall dynamic with such big hockey personalities, if you will. They have strong opinions. I don't know if that's right. They're thick-skinned. Both of them are thick-skinned. Maybe that's kind of what I'm looking at here. How is that dynamic going to work?
Yeah, they're both really set in their own ways, is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
You got one guy who is future, build it up and build it from the start and get a good foundation going. And then you got a guy who will probably look at it and go, what do you mean get a good foundation going? You've got Crosby, Malkin, Letang.
Yeah, real quick on that, though. I did hear him speak on his goodbye version of, he was on 31 Thoughts. It was like right before he made that push, and it was like sort of like thank you for everything here, and thank you for everything you've done. Let's talk about what you're going to do in Pittsburgh. And he was pretty much asked bluntly about this. What is your idea for this team and for the future? Is it win now? Is it sort of a rebuild? And he said, obviously, there are obstacles along the way. We're going to see what happens this year and then make tough decisions in the offseason. So if they make the playoffs and if they succeed, maybe they think that there's more time and there's more gas left in the tank. But if it gets ugly, let's say they fall in that fifth area, which is where they are now, sitting with their record is 7-6-1 in fifth place. If this is who they are and they're more of this team, then maybe they do blow it up and trade a Malkin who's 34 years old right now and only has 7 points in 14 games and is -4. So Berkey was pretty open with, we are going to judge this off of what happens this year, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, the Malkin point you made is really good because of the fact that I don't think a lot of people realize he was drafted before Crosby was. He just didn't play before Crosby did in the NHL. He was still in Russia, still trying to work his way over. So, and not only that, but I believe it was for 4 years running, the Penguins had the first overall pick, then the second overall pick, then the first overall pick, then the second overall pick again, which means that you are going into a situation where how difficult is it to build a core that quickly when you get not only top of the line players, like when you have a top pick like that, but these are legit top of the line players where you're literally pulling the fourth time you have a pick in the top two. I don't know. I don't care who you picked. He was probably not even going to be your top line guy, so you got a franchise goalie with the first overall pick the first time around. Then you got a center with the second overall pick the year after that, who wasn't ready to come over to North America yet. Then you got the next great one, essentially. And then you got another one down the line who at second overall, Jordan Staal was picked. And you go, look at the way they look down the middle. Look at the way that they look. I mean, how can you beat that? It's really, it just builds your team out right away. And it sets you up for success. But it's interesting you bring up the Malkin point because I do think that if there's any player out of that group, like I can't see Sidney Crosby playing for anybody other than the Pittsburgh Penguins at this point. No matter how much he wants it, no matter how much the team feels like it's time, I can't see it happening. It's the team didn't do this to Mario Lemieux. Now, granted, Lemieux has part ownership, all that type of stuff, but the team didn't do this to Mario Lemieux when it was starting to fade out toward the end of his career, and he tried to make the comeback and all that stuff like that. They didn't sit there and go, well, you're out, we're trading you, because it's starting to go the wrong direction or we haven't won and the Stanley Cup years are 5 years behind us. They didn't do that. He was going to be a lifelong Pittsburgh Penguin. That's, to me, what Sidney Crosby is. But your analogy of it connecting the Phillies in baseball to the Penguins in the NHL is perfect. Here's the guy who has all of the past experience, and that's not to say Hextall doesn't, because he held that spot for, 4.5 years, I think it was, by the time it was over. But here's the guy who has been around the block numerous times, who has sat in the GM chair. It's not like he's just some guy who you go, he's hockey operations, and that's it. No, he's been the GM. He's probably going to oversee this whole operation. And you get this guy who is going to be the GM, so to speak, but you kind of already know in the back of your mind that anything that's done is done jointly, that you go, that wasn't the GM acting, that's both sides acting and trying to find a way to make it work. Like, that's what Brian Burke is. And, Brian Burke has made a number of deals over his years as a general manager. So when he says he's not afraid to do something, he's not afraid to do something.
I know,
so
and
when
that's
the
why
time comes around, we'll be, that's a get your popcorn ready at the offseason type of thing right there, because he's going to be, if they decide they need to, and basically you'll already know the answer to that question, I think, if they don't make the playoffs. If they find a way to make the playoffs, then they'll be considering it, and they'll consider where they can go with the group that they have versus trying to sell off and maybe make some significant changes. But if they don't make the playoffs, you know the answer to the question already. And you're just going to be sitting back when that offseason gets started and waiting to see where they go.
I wouldn't be surprised if Crosby was on the table. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't be surprised. I think, because you bring up the lack of first-round picks and all that, like I think at some point they're going to realize we need to do something to get this rebuilt, and maybe Crosby's in that. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say I'm putting my money on it, and I think it's in the the odds are so great for it to happen, but I do think that it might be considered. He's got 4 years left on his deal after this season for that $8.7 million contract that he signed forever ago. So, look, I know that Berkey's tendencies, and he's not afraid to pull the trigger on some things. While it's very hard to give up on a guy like Sidney Crosby, as you mentioned, you could still put him in the conversation of the best in the league. Maybe not as many flashy plays, maybe not as many highlights in terms of end-to-end, but everything he does that doesn't pop and isn't sexy, he dominates in this game. So for him to still be at that level, but maybe that's what is the most intriguing to these guys in Hextall and Berkey, is like, we have that many issues moving forward. The return package could be so extreme. Maybe it's so damn good of a package that we get in return that we have to do it. I don't know. It'll be interesting. It's a very hard decision, very brutal decision. Here's a question, though. Is Sullivan safe? Is he a guy that should be worried about anything? Is he a guy that is along for the ride? If you do rebuild, do you need a coach like Sullivan to be part of the rebuild? A guy who has won a championship, a guy who has won a Stanley Cup, so he can somewhat mold this new core? Or do you look for a fresher voice and refresh everything, hit the reset button?
That's an outstanding question. Because I've watched people over the years. This is just reading through in between the lines here with what I see and what I hear out there. People are not thrilled with him after the last couple of years. The honeymoon's over from the Stanley Cup years. So is he safe? No, because I think, again, it's going to come down to, I think he's safe for the rest of the year. I'll say that, because I do think that they're going to look at the core. They're going to look, and I say safe for the rest of the year because of the fact that if they're where they are right now for the rest of the year, and they're 2 points out of a playoff spot, then they're not going to blow the whole thing up at that stage of it. They're going to look and they're going to go, well, one result away could put you into the playoff picture. That's not the time to make a significant change to the coaching staff. That's not the time to trade somebody away. None of that. So I think he's safe for the rest of the year, but I definitely think when we get to the offseason, especially if they miss the playoffs. If they miss the playoffs, I think he might be done, honestly. Because in the same way that I've watched people talk about Matt Murray and the way that honeymoon was over the second that the third season started, and now, it literally turned into what have you done for me lately right then and there. And I've heard a lot of the same conversation when it comes to Mike Sullivan. And there's people who, as soon as they lost that playoff series to Montreal, there were people who wanted him gone.
Yeah, I wonder, though, I know, I remember those moments, and I remember hearing the screaming and the outrage, but sometimes when I hear that, I just wonder, is that the irrational side of the fan base that just wants everybody gone every time they fail, every time that they're miserable? For example, I was listening to Toronto sports radio the other day, driving home from work, and they were destroying Tavares, ripping Nylander. This is outrageous. This isn't good enough. And I'm like, guys, Tavares has 14. He's got 15 points in 17 games. Nylander has 12 points in 17 games. Now, I'm not saying you can't nitpick some things and want to be stronger in certain areas and want them to produce more and all, but like they're upset they're not playing at a Matthews and Marner level. Well, not everyone on the team can do that, so I bring that up because I just wonder when people want him gone, this isn't good enough. Is that equivalent to the people that want the Eagles head coach fired after every loss?
It probably is, because let's this way. I just went over and I looked at the standings really fast, right? This team has 26 points. They're 12-3-2 in 17 games. And the talk is, well, Nylander's not giving us enough.
Yeah.
And Tavares
but
isn't
here's the
giving us
thing,
enough.
though. Ray Ferraro was on the show, and like I'm a Ray Ferraro-man. All right, I think he does an
I love him. I
excellent
think he's
job.
one of the best in the game, yeah.
So when he starts giving it back to them, he's like, yeah, they got to be stronger up the middle, and I don't think that they're doing good enough once they lose the puck. They're not doing anything to get that puck back, and he was kind of feeding those two a bit. So when I heard it originally, I'm like, are these people crazy? Then Ferraro digs deep into it too, and I'm like, oh, hold on a second. If Ferraro's going down that road too, maybe there's something more to it. But I just think it's crazy that Tavares had 15 points in 17 games, and the way that they're speaking about him, it's as if he had 6.
Well, okay, first of all, you're talking about a conversation that happened before they won another game. So they were at 24 points and 11 wins in 16. So, okay, maybe you need a little more out of Nylander and Tavares. I don't know. I mean, listen, this is the conversation that in Philly we have with Claude Giroux all the time. And you look and you go, well, the Flyers are 8-3-2 through 13 games, and Claude Giroux has 11 points. But sure, he hasn't showed up and played any game this year.
I guess I'm a hypocrite because I've been ripping this Flyers team saying they don't have enough, and you just spit off their record, and they're pretty damn good. But there's definitely different flaws here on these two teams.
Right. Well, right, there are. And see, you point out when you get into it with the Flyers and you talk about the Flyers like that, you're not looking at how many points a guy has in a certain number of games. You're sitting there look at how many goals they might give up in a game. Look at how the defense did this, or they gave up whatever in the third period. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I can go and look at the points totals and go, there's 5 players on this team that are right there and close to being point per game players.
Yeah.
And that's, so I don't sit there and go, gee, you have a scoring problem because you have 5 guys who are close to point per game. You don't have a scoring problem. You probably have a lot to be desired on the defensive end. Where this is coming from in Toronto with 2 guys who are right there anyway. Plus, I just told you before we started recording this, Austin Matthews has 14 goals in 17 games. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, he had another one last night too. I mean, that added to that.
There's a difference between looking at somebody like it happens with the Flyers all the time. There's a difference between looking at somebody and going, I feel like you're still the one guy who turns the whole thing over, who makes it happen. And people do that with Giroux way too much anyway, because I don't think he's that player anymore. So for him to be at 11 and 13, I go, well, that's pretty darn good, because he's not supposed to be the point per game guy necessarily anymore. He doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And yet, so people are doing this in Toronto and they're going, well, we need more from Tavares. We need more from Nylander. We need more from, and you're going, you've got the guy in Matthews though. That's the guy who drives it. And everybody else around him is a supplement of that. Whether it's Marner, whether it's Nylander, whether it's Tavares, whether it's anybody else, they're there to just then be the supporting cast, but your leader is Matthews. I understand Tavares, and Tavares probably gets the same attention for the same exact reason that I brought up Claude Giroux. They put a letter on your chest, and when they put a letter on your chest, the expectations go from here to here.
And the money. I think more.
Yeah, the money too.
Yeah, they're not. I even said that when we were breaking down the North Division on our first episode. Look, they got Tavares, and the great thing about him is the fact that the depth is you don't have to rely on John Tavares to be that guy. Now, the money side of things will piss people off because it's, well, we paid you to be. But when you have a guy like Matthews stepping up and Marner playing electric hockey as well, just let it play out. I think you'll be fine. The fact that you're this way and they're, quote, underperforming, well, what happens when they start performing then? I mean, they're not. I mean, they're still putting up good points, but let's say they do elevate themselves to the next level, which I think they could still be better versions of themselves. Well, then think about it. You'd be an even scarier team. So I just think it's crazy. And how about that 5-1 loss? Or no, they were up 5.
The 5-1 lead.
Yeah. So it was basically with 20 minutes to go. There was there was a couple of seconds left. It was a shorthanded goal Ottawa scored right as the second period ended, which at the time you think, okay, it's unfortunate, it's brutal, but that's not going to be the difference in the game. And then they just let the foot up off the gas. Now, luckily, they ended up beating them Wednesday night 2-1. Kerfoot scored a third period goal to make the blow not as bad, but what a miserable game that was to be up 5-1 and to lose.
Yeah, and this is the way that it goes sometimes, because you mentioned it like the way people do it with the Eagles and like a head coach on the Eagles side. If you lose a game badly, whatever way it is, whether it's a blowout, 6-1, or it's the close game where you led by 3 or 4 or whatever it is, it becomes magnified. They don't have that many losses to go off of. That was their fifth loss of the season. So they only had 4, and they had 11 wins going into that game. So they lose a game like that, and everybody goes, the sky's falling. This team is losing it. They're never going to succeed.
Keep in mind, they lost against Ottawa previously in the season, too. So, in a Canadian market where you're losing to the Ottawa Senators when you're supposed to be a Stanley Cup contender, that'll really piss you off.
I wonder if the way we view the playoffs this year, like the mantra has always been, in a regular season, in a typical 82 game season that starts in October and ends in April, it's been get to American Thanksgiving, and that's kind of like the marker where you can look at the standings and go, well, the ones that are there are probably going to be there, and the ones that are not are probably not going to be there. We're past the quarter mark on most of these teams at this point. I believe there's maybe 2 teams out there that haven't played, 2 or 3 that haven't played the 14 yet. And, we glossed over that a little bit in the first episode because we did not want it to be doom and gloom around the COVID stuff.
Yeah, I'm over it.
But the North Division is the one that is the one division that hasn't been affected. So they're the one that you can kind of look at where they are in the season and go, everybody's hit that marker. Everybody's at that spot where you can evaluate where they are a quarter of the way through, and everybody's on pace to finish the 56, no problem. If you're Toronto and you go to that cut line, you have a 9-point advantage right now. I think that's kind of like hitting the American Thanksgiving point and going, you're comfortably in the picture at that point. You will probably be there throughout. Now, the big difference is you play everybody in the division anyway. So how quickly can it shift? Johnny Gaudreau told us this when he was on the last episode. They're 4-point games. They're not 2 points here and there. And you go, well, that's 2 points I don't get back. Oh, well, no, that's 2 points you don't get back and 2 points they gained on you. It's always the 4-point game situation. So I think that's another part of it, that it can shift that quickly. But a 9-point advantage to this point in the season on the playoff line is pretty significant. Now I think for them, it's about getting the better spot to succeed in the playoffs, because we know that's really the story when it comes to Toronto. It's not about the regular season success. We've seen this before. We've been down this road before. We know that they're a team with a lot of talent. But once you get past that point and now you're into the playoffs, and you're going to play somebody in a 7-game series and have to find your way out of it. We've watched them do before. I mean, I saw the memes that were going around because they lost a 5-1 lead to Ottawa. And someone made one that was all of the banners were recreated to say blew a 4-1 lead to Boston, lost to our own Zamboni driver, stuff like that. Like
what was really, that guy's name again? Do you remember
the goalie?
Ayers, David Ayers. That's amazing. It's funny, real quick. We were talking about this at 97.3, off the air, just during a break or whatever. But our producer, Josh, is a big UFC guy. And I said, could you imagine a situation where, this Zamboni driver is someone that gets thrown in there because it's an emergency goalie situation? What if there was an emergency UFC fighter that, if something can't happen, here comes something equivalent to a Zamboni driver, gets into the octagon, and then ends up beating Conor McGregor? I mean, that's kind of what happened in this situation where this Zamboni driver won an NHL game. I mean, it's so wild to think about that actually happened. It's funnier the more and more you think about it. Like a Zamboni driver.
Oh, it is. And see, not only that, but it makes me laugh because of the fact that you get to a certain point where it happens so infrequently that it's not people don't just get excited for the fact that the guy goes in possibly. If the guy has to sit on the bench for any reason, people are excited because they go, could it happen? I remember a few years back when it happened at a Flyers game I covered because they were playing Chicago, and Chicago lost one of their goalies, so they needed the guy to sit on the bench the entire time. And then later on, the Flyers needed him. Or this was the guy, yeah. So this is the guy who filled in for Chicago. They weren't able to, and the story was they were going to put him in if they got scored on into an empty net, I believe was the story. And then the Flyers had him a little while later because he was able to come onto the bench. I don't know if you remember.
Think I remember. I think
Michael
I do remember
Neuvert,
that.
Like collapsed in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
Early on, so it's funny because neither of these guys were with the Flyers anymore. So Anthony Stolarz came in and he actually ended up pitching a shutout in that game, I believe. And it didn't count as a sole shutout for him because Neuvert played the first 7 minutes, I think.
That's
right.
Like I do remember.
They tried to sneak the guy in. They tried to get him in at the end just to go in for a couple minutes. So he got to skate out on the ice, get an ovation, stand in the crease, and then they told him,
it's amazing.
No, come back. He's got to get off the ice because it's not an emergency or whatever.
Right.
So
that is pretty amazing.
As much as they had to play devil's advocate there and say, no, you can't do that. Nonetheless, people just freak out when that happens, when a guy even so much as sits on the bench and is going to possibly be part of this, So that's it's funny that we keep bringing up that story because not only, it's happened a couple times in recent years too, where it's like, here comes this guy and he helps win the game. It's not just he comes in and all right, it's not the greatest ending in the world, but he was in, he did what he had to do.
Yeah, they win like 7-6 or something. It's like, well, he let up 6 goals, but they got the win somehow, kind of thing.
No, it's not even that. Like, I think Ayers let in 2 goals, and then, they won because they were up pretty big or whatever. But I'm thinking of like the Scott Foster game from a few years back with Chicago. He comes in and he made made 7 saves or something like that, and didn't allow a goal and finished off the third period. And it's pretty funny stuff when you watch this because the team just gets such a lift
in what
from
sport, even with the hockey fighting, in what sport can you just be so pissed off with someone that you're like, you know what, let's just go. Like, you could just fight each other. In what sport can some random guy come in the NBA? Imagine me, here I am at 5'11". Hey, Brodes, we need another guy. And then I dropped 25 points in the NBA. It's crazy. But look, what else is crazy is the Central Division. And the Panthers are crazy. They're 10-2-2. Talk about having COVID issues at one point. And what you look at Huberdeau, ew, filthy. He's tearing it up. He had a filthy one. A Barkov, Hornquist. But here's one that stood out to me when looking at this Panther squad. Keith Yandel. This guy, before the season started, it was all about him maybe being a healthy scratch to ruin his streak that he's on, and he's got 9 points in 14 games as a defenseman. That whole story was a joke in the beginning of the year. Talk about a slap in the face of disrespect, and luckily he came out. He scored that game, too, to start the season off. The Panthers, man, like Huberdeau, I think they got some underrated talent that no one talks about, because they're in the Florida market.
Yeah, I think about the guys that they picked up in the offseason. That's where it goes. That's where it goes for me, because this is a team that lost Evgeny Dadonov. They had Mike Hoffman. They lost him. Like, that was their offense, a lot of it in the previous years. And you're going, how do they replace that aside from Huberdeau and Barkov and guys like that? Well, I knew that I liked the Duclair signing because I'm like, that's going to come back and help I think that'll help them. But to me, the guy who they actually acquired that stands out, and it's ironic because we're going to bridge the gap from one conversation to another right here. Patrick Hornquist has been outstanding for them. And here's a guy who they get in a trade from Pittsburgh who has seemingly found new life with this team. He's found a new way to be that same contributor he was in Pittsburgh because he used to be that guy in Pittsburgh. He's been, he's around the net. He's got a decent shot too to go with it. So he can score from a dirty area, but he also can take a good shot for you and things like that. So it's funny how he's finding that sense of new life and being able to be a top guy for them as well and come through. I believe the other night when they played Carolina, like we said the other night, and Alex Wenberg gets on the board, and Alex Wenberg was a guy who was kind of cast out of another, from another team within that own division from Columbus. He was in and out of the lineup, couldn't really figure out the way to stay in the lineup. And now it seems like he's got a regular place in Florida. Joel Quenneville seems to like him, things like that. They've got a lot of that going for him. I'll give you the Yandel discussion too, because Yandel was a guy who I think was 1 foot out the door, kind of. At least that was the way they were trying to.
Yeah, they were going to healthy scratch him for the first game. I mean, that's so disrespectful. And look at how he's been playing. Look, Keith Yandel, I'm not going to make it seem like the guy's in his prime anymore, but he is not at the level of he should not be on the ice and he should be a healthy scratch. That's just an organization viewing one man in the totally wrong mindset.
Yeah, I mean, their defense doesn't jump off the page to me. That's the interesting thing. Like I look at them on paper and I go, it doesn't jump off the page by any stretch, but they have succeeded. That's the thing. Like you can't take away the record. The record is what it is. Even goaltending, because there have been times where Bobrovsky wasn't everything you thought he was advertised to be. I'm really pleasantly surprised with Dredger. I think Dredger's had a really good start to the year, and that turns it around too, because now again it's that 2 goalie thing. You can go to either guy and still have a shot at having success. And they've had some, some moments this year. I'm not going to say that like they've been perfect by any stretch, but they've put themselves in position to succeed more times than not, and it's got them at the top. And I don't think that if you would have asked me through 14 games, how many wins are they going to have, that I would have told you 10. I don't think I would have been able to see it that way.
No.
I kind of saw that game against Carolina on Wednesday get to overtime and kind of was just waiting for Carolina to find a way to win it. And instead you get the 2 guys out there that really are the difference makers at forward, and Barkov makes that heads up play that leads down the other end. That's how it's got to work.
It's crazy you mentioned their defense, though, and, I think of Aaron Ekblad and all, but talk about a guy who just logs you a ton of minutes, but based off the market, it's like Aaron Ekblad. You just, the name doesn't pop because he plays in Florida. It's crazy because he's a guy drafted so high and logs you a ton of minutes and is a stud at his position, but you play for the Florida Panthers, and there's just not a lot of buzz there. And with this team, I just wonder, how many times have we seen this team had some nice moments in the regular season, but then somewhat fall to sneak into the playoffs later on?
Yeah, it's happened before. And, one of the things that I look at that's, kind of interesting. I mean, they've played Tampa Bay 3 times. They won twice. And that's saying a lot, but at the same time, it's early in the year. So it's not, you're going to play that team 5 more times also, like let's not gloss
Tampa
over
only
that
has
fact.
three losses, well 4 if you count anything in overtime or a shootout, but they're 10-3-1, so it's not like they're losing many games. So for the Panthers to be the team to knock them down twice, it's pretty impressive.
One, and see, here's the thing. I'm looking at their schedule in front of me right now. They've got 3 more. They got 3 against Dallas for the first time this year next week, and then Carolina's on the schedule for 2 more coming up. And it's like, that might be because that Wednesday game was the first meeting against Carolina this season. They've played Tampa Bay 3 times and beat them twice, but I'm not seeing much against any of these teams. Like they haven't played Dallas yet. 1 game against Carolina, 3 against Tampa Bay, but Tampa Bay was also kind of going through because Tampa Bay didn't have Stamkos for one of the nights. I think that was the night they won, ironically, but that is what it is. Like you have to work around that too. And you'll see what happens if Tampa gets to full strength here. But that's where it could change for me. Like I want to see them play Dallas now. I want to see them play Carolina again, because Carolina got on a roll pretty quickly, and Florida had to fight back in that game. So
yeah, it's very true.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Those are great points. How about Chicago, though? They started out the season 0-3-1, and they really looked like a team that was going to be the Ottawa Senators. When you saw them play earlier in the year, it was a laughing joke, and it looked like it was just going to be one of those seasons for Chicago that could possibly be unwatchable. And I guess maybe you didn't have John Tavares, and you still don't, right? He's still not he's not in return or anything like that, right? John Tavares, do we know anything about his return?
You mean John Taze?
Oh, yeah, sorry. What did I say?
Tavares.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Jonathan. Yeah. Jonathan Taze. Is there an update on where he's at with everything?
Not really, to be honest. There's just, I haven't heard a lot of anything about him at all. I mean, look, I'd have to see how their stretch goes too. I'm looking at who they've played, and they got off to the start they did because look at who they played to start the season. 2 against Tampa, 2 against Florida. So, okay, I kind of get that. They didn't even really get on a roll right away either, because they beat Detroit twice, which isn't saying a whole lot in this division. They lost 2 games in the extra time, 1 in overtime, 1 in a shootout to Nashville. Then they lost to Columbus in a game. So essentially they had 2 wins in, what is that, their first 8, I guess it is. And then they beat Columbus. Okay, they lost in a shootout to Carolina. Then they beat Carolina, and all of a sudden they've gotten on this roll. But they're playing teams like, they beat Dallas twice. I feel like that might be the significant one there. And they did beat Carolina another time in there, but they've beat Detroit twice again. and they beat Columbus last
So
week, and
you
they
want to
split the two.
you need them to prove to you that they can beat top tier teams and not beat up on the Red
Well,
Wings.
kind of, because I need to see not only that, but they've also played 4 more games than everybody else, just about everybody else in the division. At least the teams that are right there. I'm looking. Florida's at 14, Tampa Bay's at 14, Carolina's at 14, and they're all right at the same point total or one below. And it's like, okay, you can be one of those teams where I go, yeah, this looks like a stacked division, 22-22, 21-21, but one team's got way more games to get to that 22 than the rest do. And I'm looking, like, to me, I highlight the 12 games played by Dallas and the 14 points and go, well, when you get to 14, if you're at 18, or whatever, like, you're closing in on that mark too. So I wouldn't be shocked if you get to a spot where it's like, oh, okay, Dallas is in that picture too, because they finally caught up on the games played.
Yeah, no,
That's where I'm at. Like,
yeah.
it almost feels a little bit like when they were playing in the playoff series last summer, and you go, are they really actually in this, or are they just kind of getting the breaks right now, and eventually will it catch up to them when they play somebody who's better, or when it all evens out, or whatever it is. It's not to take away from what they've done, because Patrick Kane is carrying that team a lot. Alex DeBrincat is carrying that team a lot, and they've got some young guys who have come up. I think a Pia Suter, like, where did he come from? Don't even know if I even heard of him before the season started, and he's having huge success. So it's not like they don't have pieces. It's just that I don't know that team is in a spot where, especially without Taves for probably the duration of the year, are they in a spot where I think they're ready to be among that grouping? I don't know. I don't think they are.
No. I don't think that they are either. I just guess I'm surprised that they battled to this point and they're winning some sort of game. Not that I thought, they were going to win no games, but there was a moment where you kind of looked at this Blackhawks team, as we talked about it with the Penguins a bit, where sometimes you got to hit that reset button and refresh a little bit. It almost seems like you're in that type of category with them. And the way they started out the season, I just thought, like, look, they were going to be more bottom feeder of this. I never even thought that there would ever be a time where they would be second. And you mentioned that, well, look how many games played they have compared to others, which is a very valid point. I guess I just never even saw them at all, ever even being in the mix with some of these other teams at any point in the season. So to see them come out to the start that they did and somehow be there now, it's intriguing. Like, I enjoy watching Patty Kane play this way, though. Sign me up for 23 points in 18 games of Patty Kane with those filthy mitts. I'm here for it. I'm not complaining. But, yeah, look, between them, you have Tampa Bay. What do you think of Columbus, just looking right outside? They're 7-6-4, 18 points. John Tortorella team. That is always going to work hard. Oh, there's no doubt about that. They'll give you the work ethic. But do you think they have a possibility of sneaking into anything? Like, maybe if Dallas underachieves and we talk about Chicago the way that we do, can Columbus be that team to sneak in that fourth spot?
I'm wondering which of the teams budges, kind of, because there's 3 teams up there with 10 wins in 14 games. And I go, somebody's going to lose that at some point. Not everybody. Like, these teams are not going to come through, play a quarter of their games, and then all of a sudden get to, like, they're all going to be at 35 or something like that. They're not. They play each other too much for it to happen that way. So I'm wondering which team kind of bends first, and then where Columbus can jump in if they can. Columbus is about exactly where I kind of thought they would be. Like, they're still that hover the playoff line kind of team. And I think some of it has to do with, I don't want to call it the lack of a star, but like, because certainly they made one of the biggest in-season trades we'll ever see, probably. And it had a lot of, underlying circumstances that made it possible. Don't get me wrong, but like, you've got a guy who's a high-end talent and who people talk about on a regular basis. I still see people talk about it on non-game days, stuff like that. And yet it's not the move that puts you over the top. They've been down this road before where when they had Panarin, when they had Duchesne, when they, and these are guys who don't end up staying long-term either. So it's like, they almost can't seem to get to a spot where they have those guys for year after year so they can establish that guy as the foundation piece.
Is that a Tortsy problem? Or do people not enjoy play? Do people look at Tortsy and say, I don't know if I want to do this long term?
I don't know if it's that. Like, I'm thinking it's like, it could be, that's
a
probably
combination. A combination of a couple things.
It's probably part of the equation. Like, I think about it kind of like, You mentioned the Florida market thing, like it's kind of like that too. It's not that it's not a city that can't be successful and enjoy a sports team, but it's also not, for a lot of players, it's not necessarily a destination, like it's not New York or LA or Chicago or one of these Canadian cities where it's big no matter where you go. That's what teams are looking for, or players are looking for when they pick a team, and don't get me wrong, success plays into it, because I don't think Tampa from a city standpoint is that, but the team is so successful and has been for years, and the fan base has thus rallied around the team that people go, that's a destination. Sure, I'll go play there. It's the places where you don't have a lot of people, and where you may not see the fan support on a nightly basis that makes people go, I'm not sure about this destination. And players have more, I feel like, have even more of a say now than they did before, in the sense that they start to get this in their head. I think like we've talked about, and the two Columbus examples are exactly the case here. Artemi Panarin has his choice when he gets into free agency. It's, I want to play in New York, so they do everything they can for him to play in New York. When it's Matt Duchene, it was always about Nashville, and it was known he wanted to be there at some point. So when he got the actual opportunity to pick his spot, that's where he went, and it made all the sense in the world for him as a person that that's where he wanted to go. So players are now kind of already kind of going into it with this mindset, and that's intriguing to me, because of the fact that it can wipe out a third to a half of the teams in the league just from that alone, and not give them a whole lot. And you start to wonder what it comes down to when it comes to like money, and how much does money play a factor in someone's decision, or is it strictly I want to go to a place where I know I want to live, I know I want to experience the city as much as I do the playing of it and being part of that team, being among that fan base. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but that's what's kept Columbus where they are and not taking the step forward, because when they won the playoff series against Tampa Bay and knocked them out of the playoffs that quickly, in a year where they were outstanding in a regular season, it's like, that should be the calling card that takes you to the next level. That should be the first of a big chapter for you, where you go, now we're having the success we've always thought we could as a franchise. And they haven't gotten there. And it's
Yeah.
been one playoff run. Then you have, they're going into another season where now they're like on that fine line. It's like something's got to give at some point with them.
Yeah, no, you normally don't have that type of success, and then everybody wants to leave and go their own separate ways. So it is pretty interesting. But look, with that being said, we're gonna wrap up episode 2 here of Open Ice Hits. This is great, man. We just hit the start button, and we can go on for 3 hours just talking about this damn game. So I'm excited to see what's in store for us for next week's episode. Another episode with Johnny Gaudreau after the Battle of Alberta. So that'll be very fun to get his thoughts on how all that played out. So, so with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.